Since Eddie Redmayne is at the moment nominated for Best Actor at the Oscars for his portrayal of Stephen Hawking in The Theory of Everything, let's see how Sherlock himself portrayed the man, shall we? Hello YouTube, Film Buff 06 here. In order to commemorate Eddie Redmayne's recent Best Actor Oscar nomination for his role as the legendary physicist and scientist extraordinaire Stephen Hawking in The Theory of Everything, I thought I might as well do a special review for the 2004 TV biopic Hawking, which was initially broadcast on BBC Two on the 13th of April 2004, was written by Peter Moffat, who had previously written an episode of Kavanagh QC, and would later go on to create such legal British TV dramas as North Square, Criminal Justice and Silk, was directed by television director Philip Martin, who had previously directed episodes of Wallander with Sir Kenneth Branagh, and Birdsong with Eddie Redmayne, as well as directed the 2009 TV adaptation of the Poirot story Murder on the Orient Express, Prime Suspect The Final Act with Dame Helen Mirren, Moe with Julie Walters, and Einstein and Eddington with David Tennant and Andy Serkis. And it stars the likes of Michael Brandon, who at one point guest starred as General Sanchez, who was, one of the leading American unit officers in the Doctor Who Series 4 finale, The Stolen Earth and Journey's End. Tom Hodgkins, who guest starred in episodes of Hustle, The Bill and Peak Practice, as well as featured in films like Hannah and Red 2, Lisa Dillon, Phoebe Nicholls, who guest starred in episodes of Midsummer Murders, Foyle's War, New Tricks, Kavanagh QC, Lewis and Downton Abbey, as well as featured alongside Sirs Anthony Hopkins and John Hurt in The Elephant Man, Adam Godley, Tom Ward, who curiously reminds me of a better-looking Rupert Everett for some reason. Peter Firth, otherwise known for his role as Sir Harry Pierce in Spooks, Matthew Marsh, John Sessions, Bertie Carvel, who guest starred in episodes of Midsummer Murders, Sherlock, and Doctor Who, featured in the 2012 film adaptation of Les Miserables, and is also better known nowadays for portraying Miss Trunchbull in Matilda the Musical at the West End. Alice Eve, who would later go on to achieve international fame with her role in Star Trek Into Darkness, and in the lead role of Stephen Hawking himself, Benedict Cumberbatch, who at the moment is himself nominated alongside Redmayne for his portrayal of Alan Turing in The Imitation Game. And this was probably the breakthrough performance, other than that in Atonement, that bagged Benedict the titular role in Sherlock. This movie also features music from the one and the only Murray Gold, who of course a year later would go on to begin work on composing the revived series of Doctor Who. Now, the story of Hawking basically chronicles Stephen Hawking's early years as a PhD student of astrophysics at Cambridge University in the early 1960s, before he used a wheelchair to move around and spoke via an electronic, synthesizer machine that makes him sound like one of the Daleks. Anyway, from when he was first diagnosed with motor neuron disease, or ALS, for which he was initially given a 2-year life expectancy, shortly after celebrating his 21st birthday, to the crucial moment when he publicly challenges Professor Fred Hoyle's steady-state theory about the non-beginning of the universe with his groundbreaking Big Bang theory about the beginning of time, based on Albert Einstein's theory, or Albert Einstein's iconic theory of general relativity, which ultimately led in Hawking's later life to the publication of his most iconic book, A Brief History of Time, whilst at the same time falling in love with his soon-to-be first wife, Jane Wilde, maintaining a friendship with his mentor, Roger Penrose, and also struggling to come to terms with his progressively debilitating physical illness. This story also intercuts with a televised 1978 interview with Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson about how the very first evidence of the Big Bang was discovered that eventually led to them winning the Nobel Prize for Physics. So, what are my thoughts on Hawking? Well, coming from someone who didn't even know who Stephen Hawking really was, other than by the mention of his name alone until early last year, this movie was just a fantastic history lesson for me. And I felt with this movie like I was genuinely invested emotionally in Stephen Hawking and the horrible disease that of course he had to live with for the rest of his life. Philip Martin's direction of this thing is nothing short of great. Whilst it does take, creative and artistic liberties with some parts of the story, which of course is inspirational, by inserting some, fictitious scenes, like for example, one where Stephen chats up a girl, played by Alice Eve, by lecturing her about physics, and also one which seems to be inspired by a similar scene from A Beautiful Mind, the Russell Crowe film, where Stephen is in a railway compartment heading for Cambridge with a woman who can talk the hind legs off a donkey, before he promptly imagines time reversing backwards. And despite the fact that some story elements do come off as a bit confusing at times, Peter Moffat's screenplay is nonetheless brilliantly well written, to the point, and sprinkled with so much emotional depth. Also, the science is just extremely well handled in this film, and the main characters, especially Stephen Hawking himself, feel like actual real people with whom you could relate and sympathise. The production values and attention to period detail are simply amazing. The cinematography makes the film look beautiful on screen. Murray Gold makes an impressive debut with his just beautiful music here, sprinkled in with classical compositions from the likes of Wagner, Brahms, Bach and Mozart, just to name a few. The acting is excellent from everyone involved. The supporting cast, including Tom Ward as Roger Penrose, John Sessions as Dennis Sciamma, who was one of Hawking's teachers, Michael Brandon as Arno Penzias, Adam Godley as as Stephen's father, Frank Hawking, and Peter Firth as Professor Hoyle do such great jobs with their roles. However, Lisa Dillon, despite doing a decent at best job as Jane Wilde, she feels a bit out of her depth in the role, in my opinion. I mean, for me, she just didn't really have the extra oomph that I felt she would have needed to portray this woman, you know, accurately, because Jane Wilde herself, during interviews, does genuinely come across as a very, you know, strong-willed woman who was, you know, absolutely determined to help her husband of 25 years to overcome his physical disability and become the science icon that he is today. But Benedict Cumberbatch is an absolute revelation as Stephen Hawking. There is really, you know, no words to describe his performance in this movie other than pure, unadulterated brilliance. Benedict manages to capture Hawking's iconic smile, his his trademark quick-witted sense of humour, and his obvious intellectual brilliance perfectly. Also his extreme physicality and the contortions that he does with his body in order to accurately depict Hawking's progressive physical deterioration throughout the film. It was kind of a Lon Chaney style performance. Lon Chaney Sr., not Lon Chaney Jr. Of course, without the histrionics, and of course without, you know, resorting to overacting. One other nitpick that I have is with the interview section of the film. I mean, granted that it gradually begins to make some lick of sense within the context of the story, especially right at the end, I personally didn't find it really all that interesting, and also found it to be a bit confusing, unnecessary, and just, you know, draggy at places. Everything else, though, just near perfection. Now, I would highly recommend this movie. I would highly recommend this movie to anyone who are fans of Benedict Cumberbatch in general, and or are interested in Stephen Hawking and want to know more about the man. in conclusion, my overall rating for Hawking is an 8 out of 10. Now, feel free to leave a comment in the section below and not only let me know your thoughts on Hawking, but also let me know your thoughts on Stephen Hawking himself as a person and as a legend in the world of science. Plus, feel free to subscribe to my channel. My next review is going to be another special one, this time for the Eichmann Show with Martin Freeman and Anthony LaPaglia. And until my next video, which is going to be my Oscar predictions video for this year. Do take care, everyone. And in the words of the great man himself, we are very, very small, but we are profoundly capable of very, very big things. Goodbye.